And what's up? What's up? Welcome in. It is GC Live Tuesday episode of the show. He is Chris Clark. I am Wes Mitchell. We are, of course, as always, brought to you by Affordable Medical USA. Check them out, affordablemedicalusa.com, 803-926-1493, home of the game day chair. Hopefully, we're going to get through the show. We've both been Chris dealing with internet issues today. I was dealing with them yesterday. We're going to do our best. So if we get splotchy or something or pixelated at some point, or there's a little bit of delay in the response, so we apologize in advance, but didn't want to cancel the show at the last minute. So here we are. We're going to do it. I see several of our loyal degenerates are in the hopefully soon to be named chat, and glad to see all of you. Hope you have been having a great Tuesday. And Chris, it's kind of this is the way covering a football team is. Yesterday, it was like it was like a news dump, basically, where so many people talked and there was so much to sort of try and glean from it. You almost can't hit everything in one show or certainly not one article, maybe even one day of articles. Now it slows down a little bit as far as new information, but I do think there's probably still some stuff from yesterday that we didn't have time to hit on that maybe we can get into a bit today.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with the official news about the coaches that were being retained and then 3 new ones that were brought on, then of course there's some moves that are still to come. There's a lot going on in recruiting right now. The recruiting side of things, Wes, for us the past, several months, it's been a little slower on that front, and there are a lot of reasons for that. The first one, the most obvious one, is with COVID-19 sort of going around. That, of course, forced a shutdown of in-person recruiting, and that's continued until next April, at least April 15th is when the dead period is carrying through. But so there haven't been official visits or unofficial visits or a lot of game visits for people. What we've seen from prospects up until now is just going around to campuses on their own, just sort of driving around, walking around campus, not meeting with anybody. And so that's been one thing. And then obviously the way South Carolina season went, there was not a ton of recruiting buzz. So some of that's picked back up in terms of the recruiting buzz with some of these new names that are being hired, coaches making contact with 2021 prospects, 2022s. There's some activity on that front. So that's a little different than it has been lately. But then obviously plenty of coaching stuff to continue talking about on the team front as well.
Yeah, I think South Carolina fans will be excited for us to, and me personally, I'll be excited as well, man, to be honest, to maybe see South Carolina get involved in some of these more maybe national battles as far as 2022 recruiting class goes. Early on towards like the middle part of the Muschamp era, we saw that. We were able to cover some big time recruiting battles, even into the last class and covering the Jordan Birch saga there. As much as we shake our heads and maybe sometimes get frustrated with trying to grab information and grab accurate information, those are fun too, and they bring a lot of interest, to our website, but the South Carolina athletics in general. And there just hasn't been that buzz for maybe the last, what would you say, 12 months, other than maybe a hit here or there. There was some buzz when South Carolina sort of surprisingly landed at George Wilson. There was obviously some buzz looking back when Gunnar Stockton committed. But because of, like you said, man, the way the season has gone, or the way the season went, it's now over, obviously. You lost a little bit of that edge as far as people. So and their interest in South Carolina recruiting. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to see a bump as South Carolina maybe gets more involved in some big time players again and actually has a shot with them, that the fans will get a little bit more tied into recruiting again, because I think people just get tired of maybe seeing, all 3-star guys and maybe not battling with some of these other big time programs. You're not going to win all these battles. So that leads to another problem, when you lose out to a major program. But still, I'm excited for there to maybe be some more excitement in that side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think is setting up to where you look at the 2022 class and beyond. I think we're going to start seeing some more compelling recruiting battles. You mentioned even in 2020, even at the end there, after a 4-win season for South Carolina, they still landed a quality class. They still beat out a bunch of blue bloods for Jordan Birch. They still landed, Luke Doty and Tonka Hemingway and, some really good guys in that class. And then, obviously for 21, we knew that it wouldn't be as much that case. So really it's compelling for a different reason going into, the latter part of the 2021 class. Now what it's about is, who's on the board. Can they go grab a couple guys late from the high school ranks, from the junior college ranks? What's the transfer portal look like? That's one that carries plenty of intrigue for Gamecock fans, is because they look around and know that this team needs help in some key spots: receiver, DB, linebacker. So you look towards transfer portal to see what kind of help is potentially out there. And if they can land some of those guys, obviously there's been a lot of portal activity. There's probably going to be more portal activity. If they can pluck some guys out of that, whoever ends up in it, that's going to, I think, carry a lot of interest from Gamecock fans too. So there's some interest there. And then into 2022, that's what the coaching staff, obviously they're finishing on working. They're working on finishing out the 21 class, but 2022 with Gunnar Stockton, with some of the talent that's in that class, can they make some moves on some in-state guys, some out-of-state talent? There's a lot of interest there and a lot of really interesting storylines.
Yeah, I'll be curious. So I haven't even posted this on our board yet, but I reached out to Gunnar Stockton's dad, who's also a coach, there at his high school. And basically right now, Gunnar Stockton's still sort of keeping it low key, has not sort of publicly said much of anything since the coaching change, other than to sort of just kind of confirm he's still committed to South Carolina, but hasn't said a whole lot. The plan, I'm told, there is for maybe after the holiday, after the New Year's, for him to come out and potentially talk again after that. So I know that's something South Carolina fans have been curious about, something that everybody will be, just waiting to see exactly what he says. Is it sort of, I'm locked in 100% with South Carolina? Is it more along the lines of I'm committed, but I just want to sort of see what else is out there? Whatever. All indications are those so far that I would think, Chris, the fact that Mike Bobo is still on as offensive coordinator, still on as quarterback coach, and still you have Connor Shaw, who, listening to Beamer talk yesterday, it sounds like this role for him will be very similar to what he's been doing before, but with some added football type stuff as opposed to just off the field stuff like that. So all those things bode well for South Carolina with Gunnar Stockton, even though there hasn't been that sort of public declaration or response or anything like that to all the changes within the program yet from Stockton.
Yeah, I mean, really, the thing that's missing that Stockton did cite after he committed was he did really like Will Muschamp. He liked Will Muschamp's coaching style. He cited that to us. But obviously, you look at the two, biggest ties that he has, they're both still in place. At the time that Stockton committed, Connor Shaw was in an off-field role. The ties there are tremendous, obviously, with Connor's brother J-Bo being his coach at Rabun County, Lee Shaw, Connor and J-Bo's father, what was the coach at Rabun County. And then obviously Mike Bobo, the connection there, has been recruiting him for a while. George Bobo, Mike's father, taught Gunnar how to throw a football. So those things are still in place. So Gunnar can be comfortable with Mike Bobo as a coach, as a person, the offensive style that he's going to, incorporate, how he's going to put him in the offense. He can be comfortable with Connor Shaw and whatever role he ends up having on the South Carolina staff. And then South Carolina itself as a school, Stockton's seen it. He's comfortable with it. So all those factors are still in place. And so it bodes extremely well for the Gamecocks, I think, to be able to hold on to him.
We got our first super chat of the show today. Appreciate that, Greg S. $10 tip, man. Appreciate that. Definitely. So Greg says, who do we think will be the assistant who makes the quickest impact in recruiting or on the field? That is a great question, Greg. And one that I'm going to have to think about for a second.
Wonder if
I'll
Greg
tell
is
you,
thinking about new hires, or can it be an existing guy? You know what I mean?
yeah. I mean, and Greg, feel free to team, to send us what you're thinking there as well. I will say this: I'm still, Chris, very curious to see where Beamer goes with these final three slots, because I think based on some of the names you hear out there, combined with B, the needs South Carolina has, particularly at one of the spots at wide receiver. Very important hires. So obviously your defense coordinator, always an important hire. Greg says new guys will be most interesting. So we'll go that direction. I will say this: they need the DC and the receivers coach hire to be a home run, in my opinion, because both of those guys are going to make instant impacts. If they need to be able to make instant impacts, I should say, particularly receivers. It needs to be a guy they can recruit to. It needs to be a guy that's got a great personality, someone that brings excitement to that position. Basically, you got three to choose from right now, as far as what Greg is talking about. Be it Eric Kimry, Pete Limbo, or Will Friend, as far as instant impact. I think Kimry's already made a quick impact. It seems like with Nick Muse, at least putting him in a position to potentially come back. We talked about that yesterday. I think that's a big get for South Carolina. I will say both those guys, him and Pete Limbo, make so much sense from a fit standpoint. We've talked about how you're putting together pieces of a puzzle when you build a staff, and to me, both those guys just fit what I think Beamer wants this South Carolina program to be about. Kimry, we were obviously already very familiar with. Limbo, we're learning about and getting to know, but both those guys to me could potentially make impacts, Chris.
Yeah. So I am with you on, if Greg is classifying it as new hires only, I do think the DC and wide receiver coach are going to have the best chance. So can't discuss those as specifically is because the hires aren't done yet. That process is not over. So I will go, that would be my answer, no matter who it is, honestly. But I think going on the three new guys that were hired, I think Kimry is probably going to have maybe the quickest recruiting impact, because I think there's some carryover there. He's in on Oscar Delp, who we profiled on the show yesterday. Obviously, they're going to try to sign a really talented tight end in 2022. He's a point of emphasis. And I think he's going to have some connections in South Carolina that are going to help too. When you obviously Drew Bobo, you look at Drew Bobo at Hammond, he's got all sorts of ties now. Mike Bobo, obviously being his dad, that's one. Number two, you got Kimry, who was his coach last year at Hammond. And number three, you got Will Friend, who knows Drew extremely well because of his history with Mike Bobo. And Will Friend dispensed Drew his first offer last year when Drew was, but he was still playing in the state of Colorado. So, that's just another, tie. And then CJ Stokes from Hammond's a guy that's carried a Gamecock offer. So that might be the fair pick there. I think Pete Limbo can have a pretty quick impact, special teams wise, just when you look at his track record, when you talk about on field stuff.
Yeah, and I think, by the way, I'm throwing up Oscar Delp here just for people to see the tight end prospect South Carolina is going after. Here's the thing, man. So it was pointed out to me yesterday, and I think this is an important thing to remember. Much like we talk about other parts of football, building a staff, in my opinion, is very much more of an art than it is a science. And we, as like media fans, etc., would rather you hire the big hot name, right? Like the next big name, the guy we've all heard about, the hot shot coordinator, the linebackers coach that signed 2 5-stars, without really getting into the fact, well, maybe he signed 5 stars at Alabama or something like that, one of these logo programs. Well, I think you look and it's very important to bring in guys that fit the mold of your program from I would say off the field standpoint, from like a family standpoint, what type of person they are. And really, honestly, Chris, you got to have guys that are loyal to you as well. If you're Shane Beamer, you're a young first year head coach, and there's a lot of egos in football. Everybody's trying to get ahead, right? Everybody's trying to sort of make their mark, and we know that obviously Eric Kimry is going to have loyalty to the University of South Carolina. This was a dream job scenario for him. He's wanted that job if it would work out for a long time. But then listening to Pete Limbo, someone I was not familiar with at all, and this is someone that's been a head coach before. He's been at places where you don't have a talent advantage a lot of times. And his press conference just screamed loyalty to my head coach to me. So I think if you want to split those two answers, I think Kimry is going to hit the ground running in recruiting and is going to bring some passion to this program and will be a guy who doesn't just look at South Carolina like the next paycheck by any means. And then I think on the field, as far as organization goes, being someone that Beamer can lean on and trust when maybe a new situation comes up that Beamer didn't expect or has never dealt with as a head coach. I think leaning on Limbo will be instrumental for a young coach like Beamer. And so I'm actually really, for the most part, impressed with the staff that he's put together so far, as far as some of the new guys.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's not always about the big name. Now, big names can be excellent.
They can be great. Yeah,
they can be great. But I think on the flip side of that, just assuming they're going to be great at wherever they go, and I'm not even talking about logo schools. We've seen some schools hire head coaches, for example, where you go, that is the absolute perfect fit. That guy's he's won at this school. He's going to go to this school that makes even more sense, and he'll obviously win, and they don't do it. And we've seen assistants do the same thing at South Carolina or at other places. And so it's much more about does the guy fit and can he do the job effectively in the situation that he's in? Is it more about the situation? Is it more about the guy? Is it a combo? It's a nuanced thing. Here's one I go back to. If you look at Steve Spurrier, you remember in 2009 or going into the 2009 season when they rebuilt the staff, when Spurrier rebuilt his staff, I think he had 6 new assistants if you count the strength and conditioning coach. Now, Steve Spurrier. He had plenty of name recognition, right? But what was sort of the tipping point of them turning around? He rebuilt the coaching staff for various reasons, and they started getting a lot better players too. Spurrier was a part of that, but a lot of it had to do with the really good staff that he put together. So if you look at where that staff came from, Wes, let's look at that. Craig Fitzgerald, where did he come from? Harvard. One of the most revered coaches now in Gamecock history. And do you remember people absolutely, we're bringing in a guy from Harvard. This is absolutely insane, And now it looks genius. So they bring in Fitzgerald. You remember Ellis Johnson. Now, that's 2009, I don't think was his first year, right? But was it 2008? I think it was 2008 was his first one. Spurrier hired Brian Van Gorder. Well, he left to go to the Falcons before he really even got started. So then he doubled back to Ellis Johnson, right? So, Ellis Johnson comes on board the year before. Eric Wolford came from Illinois. G.A. Mangus came from Middle Tennessee. Jeep Hunter where was Jeep? Georgia Tech, Memphis, I think. He was at Memphis or Georgia Tech, one of the two, I believe. Jay Graham came from Miami of Ohio, another guy that Gamecock fans love now, came from Miami of Ohio. So, those staff members were not some guys where they've been at Bama, Georgia, Florida. Like, it wasn't all these people that had just been at big name schools. He put together a staff that made sense, had a lot of go-getters, good coaches, They went out, they recruited. They had already laid some of the foundation, with, say, the 2007 recruiting class and before, and they went out and got better. So it's not always about name or where a guy's been. It's about, are you putting together good staff? And so that's where I've seen a lot of fans say, well, Beamer said he was going to put together a good staff and he hasn't. And it's like, well, we don't know. Like he didn't say, I'm going to put together a staff with a bunch of big names who've been at logo schools. That's not what he said. He said he would put together a good staff. And so now we have to see what it is, because in a lot of ways, this is the staff that he has envisioned so far.
Yeah, and he's this is something we had heard prior, Chris, and then that Beamer has sort of confirmed, was that he sort of had a depth chart. He had an A, a B, a C of coaches that were primary targets. Now, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that at the end of the day, Beamer will have landed all of his A's, but certainly a lot of these guys that he's already brought in have been guys that were already on the list and guys that were mentioned. You talk about a 5.5 hour first interview or in-depth interview with Ray Tanner and those guys, where it was laid out the plan, and a lot of these guys were already a part of that initial plan. So, by the way, Chris, we got to give a big shout out to our boy Ryan Cothran, throwing a 25 spot at us. Merry Christmas to you as well. Appreciate the kind words, man, and appreciate the tip there. That's awesome. Hey, Ryan, if you got a question, man, throw it in the chat. We'd love to answer it for you. We've got a lot of questions, Chris, about rightfully so these final 3 spots, and that's a question we have. As well. We've been digging into this, and it's been interesting to sort of follow. Obviously, there are reasons, and potentially multiple reasons, that the first 7 were announced because they wanted them to be able to get to work, but that the final 3 have not been announced yet. And, some of that probably has to do with Beamer still sort of working through it. Some of it has to do with responsibilities at those coaches' current spots, we would assume. We hope, at some point soon to be able to have another update on Gamecock Central on what's going on behind the scenes there. And I think has been one of those things that it's been kind of difficult to find concrete information on that we feel comfortable enough reporting. And then, on top of the final 3, Chris, you also have the strength and conditioning coach, which will be another key hire that sometimes gets lost a bit in the shuffle with everything else going on, but is equally as important in my opinion.
Yeah, and so that is sort of the final piece of this. Now, the defensive coordinator obviously is going to hinge on. I think it has been narrowed from what we've heard. So, for instance, there's not a pool of 5 or 10 guys out at this point. I mean, and I don't think there ever was. As you mentioned earlier, Wes, Shane Beamer came into this process with some pretty firm ideas of, hey, his top 2 or 3 is depth chart at each position. And from what he said up until recently, those guys were still in play. And have there been some shifts or changes along the way? Yeah. I mean, you look at Derek Mason sort of entering the fray a little bit later. I think that is a guy that has been in the mix just in some form or fashion. Jay Bateman from North Carolina has certainly been mentioned, and I've had some updates on the site about where things may stand on that. But a couple guys that we're still tracking and monitoring. But when you look at defensive coordinator, that's obviously a key piece that you got to put in place. And one of those guys, one of those 2 that I mentioned is still coaching, and we'll see where things play out from there. If any new information comes to light, we'll definitely be reporting on that. But you've got that. You've got receiver coach, where there's some candidates that still have responsibilities, whether it's in the NFL or whether it's with the bowl game, and same deal with strength coach. So after this weekend, there's some games, on January 1st, January 2nd. I think some NFL teams are ending on January 3rd. And so once all those moves happen, I think we'll see another. I don't know. It's hard to predict if it'll be sort of a miniature flurry, like we saw a big flurry of coaching moves announced, or if they'll trickle out one by one. But obviously, defensive coordinator is one that's going to be key, because then you got one more defensive slot that's sort of attached to that.
Yeah, and we'll see where all that goes. I think, as we said earlier, man, all these hires are huge for South Carolina because those are such key spots moving forward. And I think you have a situation. You look. And people want to talk defensive coordinator a lot, rightfully so. The thing is, there you have. Let's say Derek. Let's assume Derek Mason is in the conversation, which there's enough out there to think that he is. You have a situation there where Derek Mason also has some options, right? He's I'm sure talking to other places. He's admitted as much in interviews that he's talked to several different schools, and he also has the option, if he doesn't like the fit somewhere, he has the option to take a year off. So somebody responded to me on Twitter and basically said that this is obvious. It's 100% going to be Jay Bateman. If it was Derek Mason, it would already be announced. And I didn't even respond, but my answer to that here is that we've got to remember these coaches. It's not in a vacuum. It's not just from a South Carolina perspective. You have two different scenarios. If you say Bateman and look at his scenario, he still has a game left as a coordinator. So that obviously plays a factor. And I think that would play a factor in South Carolina potentially making a final pitch for them if they decide to go that direction as well. With Mason, it's more like, yes, he's done. His season is done, but he's sitting at home right now trying to figure out what his next step is. So it's not, if you're Bateman, you're sort of comparing staying where you are versus going somewhere else. If you're Mason, it's, do I want school A, B, C, or am I just happy chilling for a year and waiting for what I may deem being a better fit?
And Derek Mason, not that we don't know this, but it would stand to reason that he could have some NFL opportunities as well as a position coach, because he has a background there. He's a guy that's had coaching experience in the pros earlier in his career. So, you got to consider that as well. But the word actually on Mason before he started coming up with at some jobs with some openings at South Carolina, or some people are throwing around from Michigan because that makes sense, LSU, to name a few. There was a thought that he may just chill, just take a little time away. So we don't know yet. But there's two sides to it. There's what does South Carolina and Shane Beamer want to do? What do the coaches involved want to do? And so then you've got timeline on everything. When do all these different guys want to decide? When are all these different guys ready to talk? You have to consider all of them. It's not as simple as just, it's almost like in recruiting a little bit too. Why hadn't this guy committed yet if South Carolina or whatever school leads? Because he's not ready yet. So you have to sort of consider all those different aspects to it.
Yeah, no doubt, man. So again, this show is brought to you by Affordable Medical, home of the Game Day Chair. Chris, you want to tell everybody a little bit about the fine folks at Affordable Medical and why they should buy a Game Day Chair?
Yeah, you need to check out the Game Day Chair if you're on YouTube, which we hope you are, streaming with us. At the top left corner there, you'll see a picture of the Game Day Chair. It is super comfortable and roomy, a great addition to your man cave or your living room. Click the link in our YouTube description, or if you're on the podcast page, click there, and it'll take you to the website at affordablemedicalusa.com, or you can call them at 803-926-1493. and ask about the Game Day Chair. It is the Maxi Comfort Cloud with Twilight. It's like sitting on a cloud, and the Twilight technology is going to be the lay flat, zero gravity technology, a variety of positions at the push of a button. And also, I'm going to say it again, if you're in the Game Day Chair, which you should be, need to have on your Dead Soxy socks. I've got them on right now. Cold outside, super comfortable, no slip technology, and you can check out, Wes just put it up if you're on the stream, the on the right is what we're calling unofficially the Spur line from Dead Soxy. Make sure you go to deadsoxy.com and click on the college link. Click on South Carolina, and it will take you to those socks. If you don't want anything themed for the Spur line of socks, make sure you check out all of their other offerings. No-show socks, boardroom dress socks. They've got an awesome selection there at deadsoxy.com.
No doubt, man. Appreciate that, Chris. And it's a great combination. You can be comfortable sitting in the chair, and your feet can be warm because it has been very cold lately. It's actually a lot more. It's a lot more mild in Columbia today, but otherwise it has been chilly. So, what's up, Eugene? See him rolling in on Facebook. Eugene, a special teams coach at the high school level here in South Carolina. Miss Susan says she just got her Spur socks, and Doc said he got his Dead Soxy yesterday as well. So that's a great sign. The marketing is working, and I hope y'all are happy with your Dead Soxy socks. And Miss Susan also says for anyone who saw the picture and thought that they looked a little too red as opposed to garnet, that they actually look much more garnet in person. So red is actually a color that's hard, or garnet is a color that's hard to get directly right. But it's harder to show an exact color, I feel like, on a screen compared to the cloth color of it. So that's good to hear, because I know there were a couple people who wondered about that a little bit. So those are garnet, even if they look a little bit more red on the screen. So, Chris, I'm trying to remember, man. Which guys did we get into yesterday? We sort of we didn't get into all the coaches as far as playing Beamer's comments. Did we get into Dez and Beamer's thoughts on why he was so impressed with Dez Kitchings?
I don't think we did. We talked about Limbo, Kimry. Did we talk about Will Friend?
I don't think we got into keeping Dez Kitchings or Will Friend.
Okay. Yeah. So we did not. That'll be our consensus. People who have better memories than us can remind us if that's not the case. But I think you're right.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go out now. This is Beamer yesterday talking about why he was so impressed and why he decided to keep Dez Kitchings.
Really pumped about being able to keep Dez Kitchings as the running backs coach. He's someone that I've thought a lot of for a long time. I've seen Dez on the road recruiting. When I was at Georgia, I spent a couple of days in Raleigh, North Carolina, visiting with their staff about some things that Kirby Smart had sent me up there to visit with, and got to know Dez a little bit better then. Fantastic recruiter, fantastic person, fantastic coach. Did a great job at the running backs at South Carolina this season, which I think is a testament to him, because if I'm not mistaken, he didn't get hired till the springtime, if I'm not mistaken. So he's another one that really hasn't been in Columbia for a long, long time. Knew and liked him as a coach and as a person long before I got the job, but just in my short time on the job, I've been just absolutely blown away by Dez and what he's about. Still seems like every single person that we're recruiting, whether it be a running back, a offensive lineman, a linebacker, a defensive back, a defensive lineman, a potential transfer, a high school prospect, a JUCO prospect, Dez knows them and has been involved in their recruitment. They know him, and I'm really fired up by that. He's a team guy that certainly has done a great job from a recruiting standpoint that I know Mike thinks a lot of as an offensive coach. The fact that he's been an offensive coordinator before, I think is very beneficial, brings a lot to the offensive staff room from an X's and O's standpoint. And he's got, let's face it, he's got great ties to the state of South Carolina and is well thought of by a lot of people, high school coaches, fellow college coaches, and high school prospects as well.
So yeah, that's Beamer talking about Dez Kitchings. Apparently, we thought Chris was going to have internet issues. I've seen in the chat maybe I'm having internet issues and I don't even know it. But again, we apologize if it's choppy or pixelated or whatever. I don't know what's going on. My internet was out for hours yesterday. I thought it was back. It seems good on my end, but I guess it maybe doesn't look that way on yours. But I think, Chris, when you look at Dez Kitchings, this is the perfect example of it playing out, where we've already seen it play out for a year, of what we were talking about earlier in the show with hiring, a Pete Limbo, hiring an Eric Kimry, of bringing in smart dudes, but that fit what, you're about as a program. And, Kitchings is someone, you'll remember, we sort of have tracked him for like years thinking there was a chance he'd end up at South Carolina, and it just sort of never – it was never the right timing for some reason. And then it finally happened yesterday, and I think you're seeing what can happen when you give him a little bit more of a recruiting profile at South Carolina than maybe you do it maybe he had at NC State, SEC backing to sort of recruit to. But take a guy that cares about Palmetto State, not a USC grad, but his parents are still in this state. He's from this state. He went to Furman from a small town in South Carolina, which I think is important because you have to recruit so many small towns in this state, and has brought some ties to North Carolina as well, just based on his, I think it was 8 years at NC State. So I think Beamer, Beamer, there was obviously a reputation there with him coming in, but it sounds like he quickly saw, and we've even been told this, Chris, that Dez Kitchings is going to be instrumental, I think, to South Carolina's success moving forward, because he is involved in so many guys recruiting and seems to be someone, even if it's not his position or even sometimes his area, he just likes to sort of remain involved and to help other guys on the recruiting trail, I think.
Yeah, Dez is sort of a big picture guy, I think. He's not someone that's just going to, he's going to give a lot of effort in a lot of areas. And I think, he's been an OC before. He's been a recruiting coordinator before. So he's got an idea. He gets it. He knows how these things work. And so you think back to before some of these other hires got done, really the office for South Carolina, or the remote office, was sort of scaled back. So you had Beamer obviously doing a lot of stuff remotely or in the office, depending on where he was at the time. Then you had all these other guys wherever they were. You only had 4 on-field coaches who were sort of holdovers from the staff for a specific period: Rocker, Peterson, and Dez Kitchings and Mike Bobo. And so those guys were all really, pumping in a lot of extra different work, whether it's watching guys or recruiting guys. We saw Mike Peterson contacting a lot of different defensive prospects, even if they weren't necessarily his specific position. A bunch of linebackers he contacted. And Dez, same sort of deal. So he's a guy that, I think isn't selfish, doesn't have an ego, and just gets after it. And obviously, when you look at his track record with where he's been, the spots he's been, he's done really well recruiting. He's done really well developing running backs. And, even when you look at not a lot of bright spots offensively for South Carolina last year because of personnel and all those different things, but Dez Kitchings certainly did a good job with his group and has a chance to continue that. And he's doing a good job recruiting as well.
Yeah, I think you look, man, he always took care. The first thing I look at with the coach as far as a recruiter, do they take care of their own room? And what I mean by that is do they make sure that their room is stocked, not just with a starter, but with some depth. And I think the thing about Dez Kitchings at NC State is that it was a very nice combination of sometimes landing that high 4-star guy. You look at a Nyheim Hines. Sometimes it was about landing a 3-star guy who ends up being much better than maybe he was in the rankings than he was on paper. And what he was able to do with that by sort of hitting on enough guys there is they had depth at that position. I think there was a stretch where they had 3 different 1,000-yard rushers at NC State, and actually has had 4 of his last 5 years that he's been a running backs coach, dating back obviously to NC State. And then this year with Kevin Harris, he's had a 1,000-yard rusher 4 of the last 5. So, I think you look and you certainly see why he's able to, why he has the reputation that he does. But we'll see where that goes moving forward as far as guys. But he already, we said we're going to talk a little bit of recruiting. He already has sort of positioned South Carolina, Chris, I think, with some guys in the 2022 class where we don't know which exact guy it's going to be. But to me, that the great recruiters, you position yourself with enough guys that if I'm in good shape with 5 running backs, 6 running backs, I feel like I can sign one of them, and South Carolina is in a situation where they've already developed some depth at that position. You bring Marshawn Lloyd back, bring Kevin Harris back, and now you have a situation to keep adding to that with the class moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, definitely that running back room, especially if everybody stays in place, has a chance to be really good. And you look at some of the guys that Dez is in on for the 2022 class that, CJ Stokes from Hammond's a guy we mentioned earlier, in-state guy. But, the first name that comes to my mind in the 22 class is Nicholas Singleton, out of Pennsylvania. He's a 4-star guy, had a big year last year in his classification of high school ball. Really talented guy with a really nice offer list. And another guy that has South Carolina ties. He has family that lives 15 minutes from the stadium. And so he's certainly someone that we're going to be tracking pretty heavily. He's interested. He has a good relationship with Kitchings. And there are multiple other guys that he's already laid very nice groundwork with. Jaylon Glover, out of Florida, who had a big year in the Sunshine State last year. He's another one that comes to mind where, Dez has done a really good job of building relationships early with a lot of these guys. And then, look, South Carolina does have some really compelling tape, even from this past year. Not a lot of great on that offense last year for reasons that we already discussed, but the run game was good. I mean, the leading rusher in the SEC, and so they can put that on tape for these running backs. Dez can stand on his track record from his career at NC State, at Vandy, with what he did there, coaching Zach Stacy and Warren Norman, two of the best two backs in Vandy history, were under Dez Kitchings. He can stand on that. And then Mike Bobo, obviously, at his previous stops, has certainly put up, with some really talented backs, put up really big numbers too. So there's a lot to sell to these backs, and they're, poised pretty well to continue, stocking that room, it looks like.
Our buddy Travis says, can Stokes play wide receiver? Of course, referring to CJ Stokes at Hammond. Gamecocks, I would imagine, are going to be in pretty good shape now with both Drew Bobo, who we talked about, and CJ Stokes there at Hammond. CJ's dad sometimes joins us here on the show and watches. Shout out to him if he's on here. Chris, to answer the question, can he play receiver? I mean, I would say yes, but, I saw CJ Stokes play twice, I think, this past year, 2 or 3 times. And to me, he looks like a pure running back. Now, do you split him out in the slot some? He can catch the football. Is he a guy you can use on wheel routes and angle routes and stuff like that out of the backfield? Absolutely. Kickoff return type person, I think you would certainly look at getting his speed on the field that way. I like him as a pure running back, though, man. He's a kid that, since he ran that, what did he run at South Carolina? 4.4 at camp. Since he ran that, he, I was talking to one of the strength guys over there at Hammond, and he's put on some really good weight, put on some muscle, has sort of filled out his frame while keeping his speed. Very balanced kid. He can run. I think with a little bit more power, maybe even than he knows now that he's got a little extra size on him. So I like him as a true running back, but certainly he's a guy who can do some versatile things for you.
Yeah, he could help on special teams. I do think he could play in the slot or be a guy that's asset out of the backfield. But he is – I remember the first time I saw CJ, I think he was, maybe 170, 175 pounds, something like that, as a sophomore. I was at the school, visiting with Alex Huntley and not really visiting with Jordan Birch. Talking to those guys. And, yeah, I mean, he's gotten a lot bigger. I mean, shoot, it was noticeable from his sophomore year, after his sophomore year to his junior year, got a lot bigger and put on muscle and kept his speed. And as a guy that's, probably, you think of CJ, you think of a speed guy, but he's also built well and, has the potential to continue getting better and better running through contact as well.
No doubt. All right, so let's go into Will Friend a little bit here, man, because I don't think we've done that yet. So here is Shane Beamer yesterday on new South Carolina O-line coach Will Friend.
Will Friend, our new offensive line coach. Will and I actually live. I mentioned it, he lived in the same house. So he lived in the house that I moved into when I took the job in Athens in 2016. Will had lived there before I did. Across the street was Jeremy Pruitt. So it's kind of a who's who of the SEC that's been in this little neighborhood. But first got to know Will living in his house when I first got there. But another guy that we tried to hire when we tried to hire Mike Bobo to come to Virginia Tech, Mike was going to bring Will Friend with him as his offensive line. And unfortunately for us at Virginia Tech at the time, they decided to stay at Georgia. But it's worked out, and things have certainly come full circle. He's got SEC experience at multiple schools. If you look at what Mike Bobo has accomplished as an offensive coordinator and for all of the great offenses that he had at Georgia, and you can go year in, year out, and that's a fact. His most successful time period as an offensive coordinator was when Will Friend was his offensive line coach. So this was obviously your offensive coordinator and your offensive line coach. Those two guys got to work well together. They've got to mesh together. And from day one, this was who Mike Bobo wanted to get in here as the offensive line coach. And I'm thankful that we were able to get it done. Obviously, it wasn't easy to get him to leave Tennessee. They certainly did not want him leaving Knoxville. But I'm excited about having him here. And I did my research on him. And it's not something as simple as Mike Bobo saying that he wants Will Friend as his offensive line coach. I got to make sure these guys fit and that they're the kind of guys and coaches that I want in this program. And I did a lot of research on my end on all these guys. And I talked to a lot of people about Will Friend, people at Tennessee that I trust, players at Georgia that were there with Mike Bobo and Will Friend that I reached out to just to get their thoughts on it. And they couldn't have been more positive about those two guys and then specifically Will, from talking to a lot of those players at Georgia, the type of impact he had on them, not just offensive linemen, but tight ends that I coached when I was at Georgia that were there with Will Friend as well. And that really solidified things in my mind.
Yeah, so that's Beamer talking about obviously Bobo, but then Will Friend, offensive line coach for South Carolina. And, someone that I think Chris, frankly, South Carolina fans have had their questions about this, and I get it. And, I think as a guy that comes in from Tennessee didn't have the year this past season that they wanted to. Now, I tend to think Tennessee had some problems that continue to run a little bit deeper, than their offensive line coach, personally. And, to Beamer's point there, Will Friend and Bobo together have been able to do some really good things offensively, both at Colorado State, which I tend to think as we watch South Carolina's offense evolve, Chris, I think it's going to look much more like we saw Bobo, run at Colorado State compared to what he had to run this past season. When you look at what Beamer had to say about his offensive thoughts and philosophy, sort of molding or melding, I guess is probably the word, the Oklahoma stuff with the Colorado State type stuff, with Bobo's offense. So Friend at Georgia was very good. His offense at Colorado State were good. Certainly at Tennessee, there's been lots of questions from top to bottom there, but not him. I mean, just at a lot of spots. So I get that some people have questioned that. But I do think when you look at a fit, it makes sense as far as having a guy who fits and has done good things with your current coordinator.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a track record of meshing. There's always a question of when you're mixing and matching coaches. How are they is it a philosophical match? Is it a personality match? Are they familiar? Plenty of familiarity here. These two guys are close. Obviously, Will Friend's going to know exactly the offensive style that Mike Bobo's going to run from terminology. I mean, there'll be no learning curve whatsoever there, and they'll be very, very comfortable with each other. And so, Friend, when you look up and down his track, a lot of people, I've seen this a lot lately at different spots, and it's okay. Everybody's entitled to an opinion, but a lot of people are taking one sample of a guy's career, whether it's 5 games or last year or one particular year, and throwing out a guy's entire body of work. And this happened with multiple coaches in favor of just picking out what is the most worst possible way to look at it. And that's fine too. You need to consider those things. I mean, you consider good, bad, everything in between, but Friend does have a good track record in his career. I think one thing people are wondering about the recruiting angle. And obviously recruiting offensive linemen here at South Carolina is going to be different than Georgia. It's a different type of situation. It's not a logo school. So that's something that I think Eric Wolford did a good job of, is he got in on kids really early. He was aggressive with it. He was very forward facing in recruiting. And so that's actually not as typical with offensive line coaches. That's not that recruiting grinder type of position. It's a little bit more about evaluations, development. And so I think that's what we'll see with Friend, but they do have some young talent on this team that I think can still be good. They're going to get back 4 or 5 starters if there's no attrition on that offensive line. And then they have a chance, to carry forward when you look at the 2022 class, which will be higher in volume with offensive linemen in terms of number. They've got some irons in the fire there that are sort of intriguing.
Yeah, man. And all right, so I've seen a reaction, and we've got one right now in the chat. I've seen it on Twitter as well. I think we've got to stop comparing head coaching results to coordinator results, because it's apples and oranges. Getting let go as Colorado State's head coach, if you're Mike Bobo, because one of the first responses here was the Colorado State offense that got Bobo fired, when we were talking about what Friend and Bobo were able to do together. Well, first of all, when Bobo was fired, Friend had already left Colorado State to go to Tennessee. And second of all, the offenses at Colorado State were very good. So then you can't – and someone had a reaction that, he did well – Bobo did well at Georgia. And then someone else said, well, anybody can win at Georgia. Well, again, we're talking about the offensive coordinator. We're not talking about the head coach. So, it's if you didn't win as a head coach, that doesn't mean you can't be a really good offensive coordinator. So I understand why some people wanted to see a different direction offensively, and I don't want to dive all back into this again because we went into it pretty deep yesterday. But the offensive scheme you saw last year or this past season, the season that just finished, is not the offensive scheme that Mike Bobo would have been running if South Carolina had dudes across the board and had great players across the board. Even if you go back and look at what he was able to do at Georgia, even if you break it down to just against SEC, like conference games, Georgia was way up there consistently every single year. And you can't tell me just Georgia had talent. You're playing against some pretty darn good defenses in the SEC as well. And, Bobo did really good things running the offense at Georgia. The Colorado State offense was not the problem. And he has shown throughout his career, Chris, that he can evolve as a play caller and as a scheme guy. So I think we will continue to see Bobo's offense evolve moving forward.
Yeah, it was a necessity thing in terms of what they ran schematically. They had 2 guys offensively on a consistent basis. I think you could loop Nick Muse into that. He made some big plays for this team. But the most consistent guys, the other 2, the main 2, were Kevin Harris, Shi Smith. Got both those guys the ball, despite everybody in the stadium and on the field and every coach out there knowing that those were the 2 guys that were getting the ball. And look, I know Georgia had a lot of talent. Everybody else did too. What if, novel concept, what if South Carolina could recruit that type of talent to South Carolina at some point? Then you might have something. The best play callers always have talent. But when you've got a guy that can squeeze production out of similar talent to everybody else, or who can squeeze production out of minimal talent and make it better than it should be, that's when you got something. And so, Mike, but I know people are splitting some hairs about some different things, and that's understandable. And everybody's entitled to that opinion. We're giving our opinion on this show too. He's got a track record, and what you saw last year, to go back to Wes's point, they're not going to line up in the I formation from now until eternity and just run the ball all the time. That's not the only goal. But they do have to recruit some receivers. I shudder to think about this offense running a 70 throw a game air raid last year. I mean, you know, or ever, you know?
Yeah.
Or ever.
Definitely. All right, y'all. I think that's going to do it for the show today. I think we've about hit on everything we got to say. You got any closing thoughts, Chris?
No closing thoughts today, man.
Well, I do know you got an insider report up. You want to tell everybody that hasn't checked out GamecockCentral.com today what they can read about?
Yeah, check out the insider report. Link is right there on the front page of GamecockCentral.com. It's got some notes on, some 2021 targets that are out there, some names that have sort of been revived lately. Really intriguing junior college linebacker. Also, some 2022 guys that South Carolina's already in on Eric Kimry, Will Friend, with some tight ends, some offensive linemen, and a little bit more on Shane Beamer's outreach to high school head coaches in South Carolina.
No doubt. All right, check that out, GamecockCentral.com. As I don't want to say as always, but as you sometimes can do, and as you can do right now, use the code Gamecocks to get 50% off your first year of a Gamecock Central subscription. And if you're not already on there, hopefully we'll see you there. If you're not subscribed to us here on YouTube, appreciate those of you who did subscribe. We're up over 5,000 on our YouTube page now, which I honestly didn't know if it was going to be possible to do that this fast, but you guys and girls did make that possible. So we really appreciate that. For Chris, I'm Wes. We'll be back tomorrow afternoon, and I hope to see you all then.